Hello and welcome to Raptors Today. I'm Savanna Hamilton alongside Paul Jones and Sherman Hamilton. Amy Audibert will be joining us a little bit later. Now, the Toronto Raptors are coming off a back-to-back road trip, splitting the difference one apiece, one win, one loss. Jonesy, we're going to break down both games. We're going to start with the 76ers. So I'm going to you first. How did you like the Raptors defending Joel Embiid and limiting him? It's so crazy to say limiting him to 21 points because that's still a good number. But in what the numbers that he's been putting up all season, that's actually really impressive that the Raptors were able to limit him to that much. Because if you look at the roster and his size on the court, you could argue that the Raptors would have potentially been outsized by him, but that wasn't necessarily the case.
No, and whatever pixie dust Nick Nurse has for Joel Embiid and the Philadelphia 76ers. I mean, there's no Marc Gasol anymore. There's no Serge Ibaka. But, you talked about the 21 points, Savannah. It took him 20 shots. Mm-hmm. He made 6 field goals, and some of those were tough field goals. Precious Achiuwa, I looked at all the field goal attempts. Precious Achiuwa, a lot of the times the primary defender. I thought they did a good job of taking away a little bit of time and a little bit of space. And when you watch them, all of those shots were, quote, makeable shots by Embiid, but there's just another defender coming at him when he gets deep in the paint, or Precious is got a hand in his face and Embiid has to speed up just a hair and the shot is off. Or when they swing it to him out at the 3-point line, Pascal's closing out hard and he's running at him with a hand up. And all of those little things. And people, I mean, if you're a 76er fan and you look at that video, you say, well, Joel just missed that shot. That's a turnaround he makes all the time. And maybe he does under different conditions without him looking at 2 or 3 guys in the paint or having to fade a little more as Precious Achiuwa is a little closer and he has a little less time and a little less space. And just a general defensive effort, Savannah. Raptors down 16 in the first quarter and they win a game in the 90s. Where Philadelphia doesn't get to 90. And here's a team that averages 110 a game. And, Sherman and I have talked about this in a different setting. It was a grinded out playoff style win on the road. And it was very impressive. And they went after the big guy. They went after the top gun in Joel Embiid and held on to him.
What stood out to me in that game was also the rebounding. The Raptors out-rebounded the 76ers, which really impressive because I always say rebounds also are a big factor in winning games. Yes, you got to put shots up and everything, but if you could get extra possessions, that's going to lead to extra points by nature. So sure, going to you, sticking with the 76ers still, Pascal Siakam had a great offensive game in a low scoring affair, people say. 26 points, 10 rebounds, 5 assists. What are the chances that Pascal Siakam will make an all-NBA team? He didn't make an all-star. We got some thoughts on that, but an all-NBA team.
Well, Sav, when I look at Pascal's season this season and I reflect on his all-NBA season a couple of years ago, I would argue that Pascal's playing better basketball right now. Now, the team's positioning might be different, but Pascal's been able to improve his game. His assist numbers have gone up. He's a better rebounder. He's scoring efficiently. I think he was 10 of 20 in that game against Philadelphia. He was around 50%, but he's also a guy that with Fred on the floor, he's had to adjust. With Fred off the floor, he's had to become more of that playmaker, and teams are really locking in on him. And I always say when players take that next step, it's when they're at the top of the scouting report, when opposing coaches are saying, we need to stop that guy specifically. Does that guy kind of pull back? Does he become a non-factor? Or does he find a way to still be involved in helping his team get the W? Pascal's faced double teams. He's become a much better player in terms of recognizing how to get that ball out of the double team, get off it early, pull that double team, stretch it out, then get the ball to teammates. His overall growth this season has been phenomenal. And I think he's deserving of an all-NBA nod because his numbers are better than when he was an all-NBA player. And you think about it, he's had to play through some situations that aren't as, I'd say, good in terms of teammates out, his own health being compromised at time, but he's been able to figure it out. So you have to watch him to know it, but we watch him every game and we understand
Right.
what he can do and what he's done. And he's definitely, in my estimation, an all NBA player.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what was also impressive in that 76er game was the fact that, hey, James Harden was on the floor too. Like, don't forget, he was wearing the 76ers jersey as well. And he only got limited to 17 points that game. So when you have such massive threats on the floor, holding it down, it's kind of like games like those, it's wins like those that tell you the character of a team. And Pascal Siakam has been embodying that. So, I mean, it's really easy for me to say he's an all NBA player 100% this season. As you mentioned, like the season he did get it, like he's putting up better stats already. So, but we're going to hear now from Pascal Siakam and Chris Boucher following the game against the 76ers.
I think these games are good. Going to these games where, maybe you feel like you're not getting calls or whatever the case might be. Hey, sometimes it's going to happen that way. And I think that it builds character, just going out there and not looking for anything, no excuses. And no matter what, we kind of stay together, continue to fight.
I mean, I think we stayed together. We played, we all knew the defensive scheme and we try to make it hard on Joel Embiid. And obviously they got great shooters and also, sometimes it's hard to do both, but I think we had 5 guys every time connected to trying to do play on defense. So that always helps. And like I said, when we play with that energy, we could beat a lot of teams. We didn't start it well, but at least we finished it the right way.
Now, the Raptors, they lost on the second night of a back-to-back against the Chicago Bulls. Sherm, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to start breaking down the first half of what we saw. It was a super tight game. They were going back and forth for the most part until the third quarter where Zach LaVine just did Zach LaVine. He broke it completely open. Do you think it was just a little bit of fatigue that the Raptors faced? Because it is tough to play a back-to-back.
Well, it is tough. And you think about the Raptors, they've been pretty solid in terms of the second game of back-to-back. And they've been able to mentally tough it out to figure out ways to get enough wins in those scenarios. But there are games like you see against the Bulls, and there are games where fatigue gets the best of them. And I just don't think they had it. And that third quarter was indicative of that. You think about the Raptors, they're a team that's used to turning teams over and scoring off the turnovers. Well, the Raptors had turnovers in this game that led to 29 points given up off those turnovers. And I believe 13 of those 29 points came in that third quarter, where they turned the ball over and just allowed the Chicago Bulls and Zach LaVine to get that rhythm and be running it down their throats. And we all know the live ball turnover is a killer. And that's the kind of turnovers that were happening in that third quarter. And to me, yes, you look at the turnovers, and if you're watching the game, it's a sloppy pass. It's a player not cutting properly and not receiving and meeting the basketball. And then the flip side of that shows fatigue as well is, how do you get back? How many players are hustling back to try and get into the play? And you could see it. Sometimes it was just one guy back there trying to defend. And by the time the group got back there, Chicago was laying it in anyway off of a miss. So it was difficult. And I said this during the broadcast on the radio with Jonesy. You can't allow guys like Zach LaVine to get lathered up like that. Mm-hmm. They start to get out in transition. They start to get rolling. And it's hard to cool guys like that off because they're so versatile. They can make plays on so many levels. It becomes difficult to cool them off. And I believe he had 16 in that third quarter, and that was the difference. That quarter was what pretty much put the Raptors to bed. But, they'll never use the excuse of fatigue because they're too professional. They're too, I think, proud of how hard they play. Mm-hmm. But looking at that game, I can't help but think that fatigue crept in that third quarter, and they really didn't have it in the fourth either. And that might be a function of all the games they played in the last little while and the back-to-back scenario.
Yeah, I was thinking about their Western road trip. Like, that does take the wind out of your sails sometimes too, because they did have a back-to-back where they did win both nights. That was the Suns game versus the Denver game the following night, and they showed out. They played pretty well in those two games. Of course, that they got the dub there, but it's when you kind of accumulate all those games, mental fatigue starts to show too. And I think that's exactly what we ended up seeing a little bit. And as you mentioned, you could tell by them taking maybe possessions off on defense, not hustling back, plays that you normally wouldn't probably do. Just maybe they're taking it because it seems like the easier pass, but actually gets picked off. So just little things you could tell that when a team's tired like that. But Jonesy, let's talk about DeMar DeRozan in particular, because he had a great game again. Like, he had a great game. Give it to him. Let me just give you some stats here. DeMar's career numbers is 20 points per game, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, shooting around 47%. Now against the Raptors, he's 23 points, 6.4 rebounds, 7 assists, and shooting over 50% at the 53 mark. So, what is it about former Raptors or a one particular coach that they just go off against the team?
The first time I heard it said in the pros was in 1999 by Butch Carter, a former NBA player coaching the Raptors, who said it's always personal when you play your former team. He said it's like seeing the X. You always want to look good. You always want to look good. And I mean, DeMar, 11 of 14 last night, the king of the mid-range. He's playing the game. I mean, DeMar came into the league playing the game above the rim. He was a Kobe guy, and his career has kind of evolved like Kobe's. Not that he can't get up there and dunk on you, but he's playing with his head now, and he's playing below the rim as much as he is above, more than he is above the rim. And the career the same way, not maybe the same accomplishments and accolades, but you get older. And for DeMar, he's showing Toronto that. I mean, there was one time Sherm called it on the radio. He walked Fred down to the short corner and shot it over him and scored. And I think Sherm said it was like big brother, little brother. But that's DeMar. That's his game. And Savanna, to his season in general, he is still probably somewhere in my top 5. For MVP balloting. I mean, it's probably a 2-horse race now between Embiid and Jokic, but boy, DeMar has had a great season, been up there for a long time. Here's a guy that in the offseason, well, did the Lakers want him? Did they, like nobody knew? And when Chicago signed him, people, well, I'm not sure that's going to fit. And come on, he's been terrific. He's been absolutely outer worldly at times. Mm-hmm. And so it's nothing for him to do that consistently. And I think there's just a little more juice when he sees his former team and knowing how much he gave to the city. And he wants them to remember too, the fans and the organization, what he did in Toronto. So that's a source of pride, and playing that well against Toronto is something I think DeMar will always want to do and try to accomplish.
Yeah, I remember earlier this season, I was like, hey, I think DeMar might be my MVP. Obviously, as you talked about, it is a 2-horse race now between Jokic and Embiid, but that doesn't take him off the top 5 list at all, because, give him credit where credit's due. He's really holding it down in Chicago. And that's why he's a big part of the reason why they've been at the top. Like him and Zach LaVine and that team just all together has been really, really great. So we're going to hear now from head coach Nick Nurse following the Chicago Bulls game.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I was pretty happy at the half, Doug. I thought we were trying to manage the game. We always talk about that on back-to-backs, that we just try to get it to the half and see where we're at. I was pretty happy there. I thought we dispersed the minutes pretty good in the first half. But, yeah, we just weren't, ourselves defensively at all tonight. We were out of schemes quickly, and we were just not moving. We were kind of in, but we weren't getting back out very much, as you could see, and happened pretty fast there in a bunch of plays. My first always analysis of it, Michael, is to decide, is it really that bad that we're not getting good enough shots or whatever. We did go into a stretch where we turned it over maybe 2 or 3 straight times. That's concerning. But, when you've got a bunch of shots at the rim that you're not making, and a string of wide open threes that don't go in, not much more we can ask for than that.
Now, Jonesy, we're going to highlight Precious Achiuwa. We're going to give him some flowers here, because especially looking at his 3-point shooting last year, our super producer Jake pulled this out. With Miami, he was 0 for 1. He only took 1 3-point shot. And now this season, he's 40 for 109, which is just under 40%. He's shooting 36% from the 3-point line this season. So especially with how recently he's been playing, how much has that contributed to the Raptors offense as a whole?
Precious took one more shot than our producer Jake last year, right? In Miami.
Exactly.
Eric Spoelstra had him in the box. And look, he came to Toronto. We've talked about this many times, Savannah. Nick Nurse instills confidence in his players. He gave him the freedom. To quote Sherm, there were times when Precious wasn't always, what's your word, Sherm, responsible with his newfound freedom. I always say it's like a kid who's allowed to leave the porch. They go running all over the place and they realize, the porch isn't a bad place. And Precious is doing a nice job of being selective with his 3-point shooting, working on it, taking ones he can make. You talked about his 36%. He's 40% since the All-Star break, Savannah, and just taking enough to keep the defense honest. And, when you look at the rest of his offensive game, it's coming around too. Driving to the basket, making short jumpers, scoring inside. He's doing everything well offensively, and the 3-point shooting is just a part of that. So, look, I would hazard to guess, if you lined up and said, give me your top 3 most improved Raptors this season, that Precious Achiuwa's name wouldn't be on that list somewhere. So I think he's done a nice job with his offense. We talked about earlier Joel Embiid and what the job the Raptors did on him. You watch the tape, Precious was the primary defender on a lot of those shots. And he's gone to Nick Nurse and said, and I believe Nick said this, hey, man, I can shut the water off on people if it gets going. So Precious has really, really improved. His offense is just a big part of it, and that's a part that we notice. But I think his game in general has really fit into a nice spot, and he's maturing and becoming very, very responsible with his play.
Jonesy, you got me thinking. I don't even know if there's a Raptor that has improved as significantly that
I don't know either.
Achiuwa, because like you could say maybe Scotty Barnes, but he's always had a certain level of talent. He came in really strong. He's just more so finessing his game and like he's getting better and more consistent. But with Precious, it felt like he went from driving on a 6-lane highway. I think one of you guys used this analogy earlier. 6-lane highway, like not sure where to go, and now he found his lane, but he still has the options to play with as well, and he's really making the most out of that now this season. So it's a good point to note that you said. So Sherm, at this point in the regular season, typically in previous years, it's been kind of a dog day. It's been kind of a drag out part of the season. A lot of teams who are already kind of locked in for playoffs, like they're not really sweating too much, and it's just about resting your players. But with the new play-in style that the NBA introduced, it changes things. Every single one of these games matters. So how does that spice up the league as a whole?
Well, Sad, first of all, I think the players, they're trying to do what they need to do. The teams are trying to do what they need to do to protect themselves going into the playoffs. So you understand it from that perspective. But what the league had to do was look at it from a broader lens. They had to look at it from the fans' enjoyment. And fans were getting cheated out of seeing players play late in the season because teams were looking out for their best interest. And it's one of those things where you don't blame the team for doing that, because you play 82 regular season games for the playoffs, to make noise in the playoffs. That's where everybody talks about teams separating themselves. So you're going to do what you can to make it. But the league had to take care of the fans. It had to take care of the integrity of those games down the stretch. And one way to do that was, okay, we'll expand this a little bit and we'll call it a play-in tournament. So we're going to take the top 8 and then you're going to add another 2 teams that can put themselves in the mix. So now you have 10 teams involved and potentially 11, 12 teams that might have a chance to mix it up in the play-in. So you keep more teams involved, longer stretches of the season, and especially down the end, because those games are going to count. And, in the Eastern Conference, unfortunately, between the 10th seed and the 11th seed, there's a 5-game gap. So that's probably not going to change. But there's movement between 5 and 10. So there's going to be some games that are going to be very interesting to see how they shake out. Mm-hmm. And for the fans, they are going to see entertaining, competitive basketball. And at the end of the day, that's what the league would want, and that's what fans want. So, in trying to balance the sensitivities of an organization trying to be as healthy and as fresh to go into the playoffs and trying to give their key players some rest, the league said, yeah, you can do that, but you might be doing it at your own peril in terms of playoff positioning. So if you want to do that, take your chances. And now we're seeing more competitive basketball later in the season, which is, I think, good for everybody involved.
Oh yeah, 100%. I guess Adam Silver and the decision makers in the NBA offices, they really know what they're doing here. They know
Pretty
the
smart
system.
group, huh?
Yeah, a little bit smart, yeah. Okay, we're gonna throw it over now to our fourth member of our squad, Amy Audibert.
Thanks, Sav. Now let's look to the Toronto Raptors' next opponent. The Cleveland Cavaliers are going to be visiting Scotiabank Arena. It'll be the fourth and final meeting between the two teams, and Cleveland right now is holding on to that sixth spot in the Eastern Conference. They're 41-31 record-wise. They are 5-5 in their last 10, but they've played some pretty tough opponents, including Miami, Chicago, Philly, and of course the Lakers with LeBron. The Raptors know he's starting to really pick it up as well. So this Cavs team has swept the Raptors so far this season 3-0. So they have to be pretty confident coming in, and certainly going to look to finish off that business, as they really are just avoiding that play-in position. One of the biggest voids for Cleveland has been filling the position of Jarrett Allen. The 6'11" all-star has been so important to them. I mean, he averages 16 and 11, shoots just under 68% from the field. Now, he left the game the last time with a fractured finger, so he's missed 8 games coming into this one. This is a guy that is an elite lob threat. He's great off the pick and roll. And on the other end, he's also an incredible rim protector. He had 5 blocks earlier this year against Miami. So Cleveland has really been leaning on Evan Mobley in particular to pick up that inside presence for the Raptors. This is a great opportunity to get that game back from early March, because when they went to Cleveland, they didn't have their best performance, especially when you looked at the glass. Toronto got out rebounded 58-45, but it was the second chance. The Raptors are so good on the offensive rebounds and those second chance points, but Cleveland won that column 26-13. So I imagine the Raptors will have a lot of pride in their home court to not let that happen again. And don't forget, this is going to be our fourth and final matchup between the two Rookie of the Year frontrunners, and Evan Mobley and, of course, Scotty Barnes. So looking forward to seeing those two guys battle it out.
Thanks a lot, Amy. Now, like I said, you don't want to miss that game, because the Raptors are only 1 game behind the Cavs. Of course, the season could shake out differently still, but that's definitely a game I have my eye on with Evan Mobley and Scotty Barnes again. You could catch it Thursday, 7:30 p.m. on Sportsnet, and listen to it on Sportsnet Radio as well. From myself, Savanna Hamilton, Sherman Hamilton, Paul Jones, Amy Audibert, Jake, and Garth, thank you for watching another episode of Raptors Today.